Some truths are so uncomfortable, society buries them under jokes, labels, and fear. Because a woman who learns how to live alone without a man becomes something the world cannot easily control, and that terrifies people. Not because she is angry, not because she hates love, not because she failed at relationships, but because she discovered something most people never will: peace is more addictive than chaos. There is a woman somewhere right now sleeping alone in complete silence, and for the first time in years, her nervous system is finally resting. No manipulation, no walking on eggshells, no explaining herself, no begging to be understood, no shrinking her personality just to protect a fragile ego. The moment a woman stops needing male validation, an invisible psychological war begins around her, because the world knows exactly how powerful a woman becomes once she no longer measures her worth through attention, approval, or romantic acceptance. Most women were conditioned from childhood to believe their value increases when they are chosen. Chosen by a man, desired by a man, approved by a man, kept by a man. And because of that conditioning, millions of women spend years abandoning themselves just to avoid being abandoned by someone else. They silence their opinions to seem easy. They tolerate disrespect to seem understanding. They overgive to seem worthy. They stay loyal to people who slowly destroy their confidence because deep down they were taught loneliness is worse than emotional suffering. But one day, something inside certain women breaks, not loudly, silently. After enough disappointment, enough betrayal, enough emotional exhaustion, they wake up and realize something terrifying. The people they sacrificed themselves for were never sacrificing themselves for them. That realization changes a woman forever, because now she starts asking dangerous questions. Why am I begging for basic respect? Why am I performing for love? Why do I feel more drained in relationships than alone? Why am I afraid of losing people who barely protect my peace? And once those questions enter her mind, the transformation begins. At first, people mistake it for bitterness, but it's not bitterness, it's awareness. A woman who no longer needs validation starts seeing the world differently. She notices how many compliments are manipulation. Much attention is temporary. How many people only value women they think they can emotionally control? And suddenly, she stops performing. She stops chasing. Stops over-explaining, stops begging to be understood, stops proving her worth to emotionally unavailable people. That shift shocks everyone around her, because people become uncomfortable when the woman they once controlled emotionally suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable to manipulation. The woman who once feared being ignored now enjoys silence. The woman who once panicked when someone pulled away now lets them leave without collapsing. The woman who once begged for reassurance now watches actions instead of listening to words, and that energy terrifies weak people, because emotionally dependent women are easier to control. You can manipulate them through attention, through inconsistency, through mixed signals, through withdrawal, through false promises. But a woman who no longer needs validation, none of those tactics work anymore. And that is where her true power begins. See, people think power is loud. It's not. Real power is emotional detachment from anything that disrespects your peace. Real power. It's being able to walk away from what you once begged for. Real power is hearing you might lose me and no longer feeling fear. That changes a woman at the deepest psychological level. Because now she is no longer operating from survival. She is operating from self-respect. And self-respect makes a woman impossible to emotionally enslave. She no longer tolerates confusion disguised as love. She no longer romanticizes inconsistency. She no longer thinks suffering proves loyalty. And once a woman reaches that level of emotional clarity, she becomes untouchable to people who survive by draining others emotionally. You can see it in the way she moves. Calmer, slower, more intentional. She no longer rushes to respond, no longer explains her boundaries 10 times, no longer fights to convince people to value her, because she finally understands something most people never learn. If someone truly values you, you will not have to destroy yourself to feel loved by them. That realization saves her life. A woman who stops needing validation begins protecting her energy like her future depends on it, because she knows exhausted women make desperate decisions. And desperate decision. Cesians destroy lives. That's why she becomes selective. Selective with conversations. Selective with relationships. selective with access. Not because she thinks she's better than others, but because she finally understands what emotional chaos costs. Her sleep, her confidence, her nervous system, her mental clarity, her identity. She paid for fake love with pieces of her soul before. She refuses to do it again. And now people call her different. They say she changed, but they never complain when a woman changes into someone easier to use. They only complain when she changes into someone harder to manipulate. That's the truth nobody wants to admit. Society celebrates women when they sacrifice themselves, but becomes uncomfortable when women prioritize themselves. The moment she starts saying no, people call her selfish. The moment she creates boundaries, people call her cold. The moment she stops overgiving, people accuse her of changing. But what they really mean is this: you stopped making access to you easy. And that is exactly what had to happen. Because a woman who constantly seeks validation slowly loses connection with her intuition. She starts ignoring. Ignoring disrespect, ignoring emotional exhaustion. Why? Because the fear of rejection becomes stronger than the desire for peace. But when she heals, everything reverses. Now peace becomes addictive. Now calm feels attractive. Now consistency feels attractive. Now emotional maturity feels attractive. And suddenly toxic behavior becomes repulsive instead of exciting. That's growth, real growth. Not social media quotes, not fake confidence, not pretending not to care. True growth is when a woman finally realizes her value does not increase or decrease based on who wants her. That realization is life-changing. Because now she can sit alone without feeling incomplete, and people underestimate how powerful that is. A woman comfortable in her own company cannot be psychologically trapped through fear of abandonment. She no longer stays where she is tolerated. She no longer competes for attention. She no longer destroys herself trying to be enough for emotionally immature people. And the scariest part, once she experiences that freedom, she can never fully go back, because now she sees clearly. She sees how many relationships survive only through feature. Fear of loneliness, fear of starting over, fear of not finding better. But she already faced loneliness. She already survived silence. She already rebuilt herself from emotional destruction. So now threats no longer control her. And when a woman reaches that level mentally, her entire presence changes. She walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently. There is a quiet confidence in women who no longer need external validation to feel valuable. Not arrogance, not ego, certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from surviving emotional pain alone and discovering your worth without applause. That kind of woman becomes unforgettable because she is no longer seeking attention. She is protecting peace. And peace is something very few people ever truly find. Solitude changes a woman in ways the outside world will never fully understand. Because when a woman is finally alone long enough, with no distractions, no emotional noise, no constant need to survive someone else's chaos, she is forced to meet herself for real. And that meeting is not beautiful at first. It is brutal, because silence exposes everything. The pain she ignored, the memories she buried, the disrespect she normalized, the exhaustion she called love, the loneliness she felt even while lying next to someone. For the first time in years, there is nobody to distract her from herself. No late-night arguments. No emotional roller coasters. No desperate chasing. No performing. No pretending. Just her thoughts echoing in empty rooms. And most people cannot survive that stage. Because solitude strips away illusion. A woman sitting alone long enough starts replaying every moment she betrayed herself just to keep someone else comfortable. Every time she stayed silent when something hurt her. Every time she accepted less than she deserved. Every time she confused attachment with love because she was terrified of being left behind. And when those realizations hit, they hit like emotional lightning. That is why healing is painful. Because before a woman becomes powerful, she must first grieve the version of herself that tolerated suffering for acceptance. That grief breaks people. She begins realizing she spent years over-explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. Years shrinking herself to protect fragile egos. Years carrying relationship. Emotionally while pretending things were equal. And suddenly she understands the terrifying truth. Some people never loved her. They loved her tolerance. That realization changes the chemistry of her soul, because now she stops romanticizing emotional exhaustion. Now she sees how trauma trained her to mistake anxiety for passion, how inconsistency became addictive because unpredictability felt familiar, how being needed made her feel valuable even when she was being emotionally drained dry. And for the first time, she starts questioning everything. Why did I beg for people who barely gave me peace? Why did I feel guilty for having needs? Why did I think being chosen mattered more than being respected? Those questions begin rebuilding her mind from the inside out, slowly, painfully, but permanently, because solitude forces self-confrontation. And self-confrontation is where transformation begins. When a woman spends enough nights alone with her thoughts, she begins hearing her intuition again. That quiet inner voice she ignored for years starts getting louder. The voice that warned her about people before they hurt her. The voice that felt uncomfortable around. Fake energy. The voice she silenced because she wanted love more than truth. But now, there is no noise drowning it out. So she listens. And once a woman reconnects with intuition, she becomes incredibly difficult to deceive. She starts noticing patterns instantly. The inconsistency, the manipulation, the emotional games, the empty promises wrapped in beautiful words. And because solitude taught her emotional discipline, she no longer reacts impulsively. That's what people misunderstand about healed women. Healing does not make a woman emotionless. It makes her observant. Now she pauses before trusting, pauses before attaching, pauses before giving access. Not because she is cold, but because pain taught her access to her heart should be earned, not assumed. And the deeper she heals, the more peaceful she becomes. Not loud peace, quiet peace. The kind that changes her entire nervous system. Her body no longer craves chaos. Her mind no longer mistakes tension for chemistry. Her soul no longer feels attracted to emotional instability. That's evolution. Because wounded people are often addicted to emotional intensity. The highs, the lows, the inconsistency, the certainty. It feels exciting. But healed women eventually realize something powerful. Healthy love does not destroy your nervous system. That realization changes her standards forever. Now she values consistency over charm, emotional safety over attention, effort over promises, peace over excitement. And suddenly many people lose access to her. Not because she became arrogant, but because she became aware. Aware women are difficult to manipulate. They can feel performative energy immediately. They can sense when someone is trying to impress them instead of genuinely connecting. They can hear the difference between words spoken with intention and words spoken for control. And solitude sharpened those instincts, because isolation teaches observation. When a woman spends enough time alone, she studies human behavior differently. She notices who only calls when they need something, who disappears when she stops overgiving, who becomes uncomfortable when she sets boundaries, who loved her empathy but hated her self-respect. And those observations harden her standards in the healthiest way possible. Now she understands protecting peace is not selfish, it is survival. Taught because emotionally exhausted women slowly disappear inside themselves. They lose confidence, clarity, identity. But solitude rebuilds all three, piece by piece. A woman healing alone begins rediscovering herself outside of relationships. She remembers what she likes, what she values, what she dreams about when survival mode is no longer consuming her life. And that process is deeply emotional, because many women realize they spent years becoming versions of themselves designed for acceptance instead of authenticity. Different personalities for different people, different masks for different environments, always adapting, always pleasing, always emotionally available, until one day they become strangers to themselves. But solitude changes that. Now she learns how to sit with herself without escaping. Now she learns how to enjoy her own presence. Now she realizes loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is feeling abandoned. Solitude is finally feeling free enough to hear your own soul again. That distinction changes everything. Because once a woman genuinely enjoys her own company, the entire dynamic of relationships changes forever. Now she no longer enters relationships hoping someone will save her from emptiness. She enters only if connection adds value to the peace she already built. That is an entirely different level of emotional maturity, and most people never reach it, because most people would rather stay distracted than face themselves honestly. But the women who survive solitude, who survive silence, who survive rebuilding themselves emotionally from the ground up, become unrecognizable. not physically, energetically. There is a depth in their eyes now, a calmness in their presence, a strength in the way they detach from disrespect, because they already survived the hardest thing imaginable, meeting themselves honestly. And once a woman survives that internal battle, the outside world no longer intimidates her the same way. The most dangerous thing is that she can now face the world without being intimidated by it. About a woman who no longer needs anyone to complete her is that she finally begins choosing people from strength instead of desperation. And that changes everything. Because desperate people tolerate things powerful people walk away from immediately. A woman operating from desperation will ignore red flags just to keep someone. She will over-explain her worth, overgive her energy, overlook disrespect, accept inconsistency, betray her own intuition. Not because she is weak, but because fear makes humans negotiate with pain. Fear of loneliness, fear of rejection, fear of being unwanted, fear of starting over. Those fears trap millions of people inside relationships that slowly destroy them emotionally. And the saddest part? Most of them know they are unhappy, but they stay because emotional dependency feels safer than uncertainty. Then one day, a woman reaches her breaking point. Not the dramatic kind, the silent kind. The kind where she wakes up emotionally exhausted and realizes she cannot keep abandoning herself just to keep somebody else comfortable. That moment changes her entire psychology, because now she stops asking, "How do I make them stay?" and starts asking, "Why am I fighting so hard to keep people who continuously disturb my peace?" That shift is life-altering, because once a woman learns how to emotionally survive alone, she stops treating relationships like oxygen. Now they become choices, and there is nothing more powerful than a woman who chooses from desire instead of fear. You can feel the difference immediately. Telly. She no longer rushes intimacy, no longer forces connection, no longer confuses chemistry with compatibility, because she already understands something painful most people learn too late. Attention means nothing if peace disappears the moment someone enters your life. That realization matures her deeply. Now she watches behavior instead of words, and that alone separates her from emotionally dependent people. Emotionally dependent people fall in love with potential. Healed women fall in love with patterns, consistency, integrity, emotional safety, accountability, effort. Those things become attractive because she finally understands what unstable love costs. It costs sleep, mental clarity, self-worth, emotional stability, and she paid those prices before. Never again. So now she becomes selective, not because she hates love, because she respects herself. That's the part weak people misunderstand. When a healed woman says no to toxic behavior, people accuse her of being difficult. But she is not difficult. She is disciplined. Disciplined enough to walk away from temporary pleasure that leads to long-term suffering. That is rare. Most people are controlled by emotional cravings. Say the craving to feel chosen, desired, validated, needed. But a woman who already validated herself internally cannot be manipulated the same way anymore. You cannot control her through inconsistent attention. You cannot trap her through guilt. You cannot keep her through bare minimum effort, because she already discovered something powerful in solitude. Her peace does not disappear when people leave. Read that again carefully. Her peace does not disappear when people leave. That changes how she loves. Now she no longer clings, no longer chases, no longer loses herself trying to hold on to people who are emotionally unavailable, because she understands real love should not require self-destruction. And once a woman reaches that level mentally, she becomes terrifying to emotionally immature people. Why? Because emotionally immature people survive through control. Control through confusion. Control through inconsistency. Control through making someone feel not enough. But a woman who already built her identity outside relationships, those tactics fail instantly. She recognizes emotional manipulation immediately because desperation no longer blinds her judgment. That's why healed women saw and leave quietly. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic performance, just distance. Because once peace becomes more important than attachment, walking away stops feeling impossible. And many people cannot handle that version of her. They were comfortable with the woman who tolerated emotional chaos, not the woman who values herself enough to leave the moment respect disappears. That woman is different. She no longer fears losing people. She fears losing herself. And that is one of the most powerful psychological transformations a human being can experience. Because now relationships stop being survival mechanisms. Now they become conscious choices. That changes the energy completely. A woman who chooses from strength does not need constant reassurance to feel secure. She does not panic when someone takes time for themselves. She does not obsessively chase validation, because her identity is no longer dependent on external approval. She already knows who she is without applause, and people can feel that confidence instantly. Not loud confidence, not attention-seeking confidence, grounded confidence. The kind built through suffering, healing, solitude, and self-respect. That type of C. Confidence is magnetic because it is real. She is no longer trying to convince people she has value. She knows it. And certainty changes how a woman moves through the world. Now she enters relationships asking, does this connection protect my peace? Not, how do I become enough for this person? That single shift saves her from years of emotional destruction. Because women who love from desperation usually abandon themselves slowly. First their boundaries disappear, then their standards, then their voice, then eventually their identity, until they wake up one day emotionally empty, wondering why love feels like suffering. But women who love from strength experience relationships differently. They communicate directly, set boundaries clearly, leave dishonesty quickly, protect their nervous system fiercely. And because they no longer need relationships for survival, they can finally recognize healthy love when it appears. That's the irony. The women most capable of healthy love are usually the women who learned how to survive without it first, because now they are not attaching to escape loneliness. They are connecting from emotional wholeness. That creates a completely different kin. D of relationship. No games, no manipulation, no emotional dependency disguised as romance. Just two emotionally mature people choosing each other freely instead of using each other to fill emotional emptiness. But most people are not emotionally prepared for that kind of love because it requires accountability, it requires honesty, it requires emotional stability, and many people only know how to function inside chaos. That's why healed women intimidate emotionally immature people. Not because healed women are cruel, but because they cannot be emotionally controlled through fear anymore. Fear no longer decides for them. Peace does. Self-respect does. Clarity does. And once a woman experiences what it feels like to wake up calm, to sleep peacefully, to live without constantly questioning her worth, she becomes unwilling to trade that peace for temporary attention ever again. That is the real transformation. Not becoming cold, not becoming heartless, becoming conscious. Conscious enough to understand that love should add peace to your life, not remove it. Conscious enough to stop confusing emotional addiction with connection. Conscious enough to realize being chosen means nothing if you must abandon yourself to stay chosen. And once a woman fully understands that truth, she becomes impossible to emotionally imprison again.